the audience now.
That's called melody. That's all right. I'm trying to read it.
What was it about you want me to think of that one?
Ellen didn't want to do then. Ellen didn't want to do anything. We were hoping she'd teach. That's what she was hoping.
Well, good morning. I'm here again. As I told somebody, you learn so much when you are going to teach Sunday school. And this, I think, is an interesting lesson, one that you've all heard about, the walls of Jericho going down, but there's a lot preceding it. And Israel was poised to take possession of the land of Canaan. God had brought his people miraculously across the Jordan, and they were camped at Gilgal. And this is the Jordan River going along here. Gilgal is right here, and then Jericho is right across the smaller river there. In previous verses, Israel had prepared for the coming battle in unique ways. First of all the males of the wilderness generation, that means the ones that were born after they were delivered from Egypt, were circumcised. Second, God's people celebrated the Passover for the first time in the land of Canaan. Both of these actions were remarkable because they were not the standard practice of invading armies. Instead of rehearsing battle formations or sharpening their weapons, the people engaged in God-centered activities. Circumcision is a public testimony to one's belonging to and allegiance to God. And Passover is a time of communal remembrance and celebration of God's mighty acts and the deliverance of God's people from Egypt. The implication of these actions are profound. The strength and success of God's people is dependent wholly on the Lord. These acts of obedience were the very types of preparation necessary for Israel's success. Now I've asked Dixie to read, there's a lot of preceding things, of course, to this. And some of it has been in our previous lessons, but the parts that I found was not. So Dixie is going to read Joshua 5, 11, and 12.
On the day after the Passover, on that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes and parched grain. The manna ceased on the day after they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so that the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year.
Okay, you think, well, what's this big deal? Well, think about this. For 40 years, these people had been receiving manna. Every morning for 6 days a week, they could go out and gather the manna. And in Exodus 16, it describes what the manna was like. And suddenly, when they ate some of the things from Canaan, that ceased. It's like your welfare check stopped, or however you want to think about it. But they had been gathering that every day. Not every day. They didn't gather it on the seventh day. They gathered it for 6 days. On the sixth day, they gathered more because they weren't to work on the Sabbath. What do you think they felt like? I think it's an amazing thing to have suddenly stopped.
Were they supposed to gather up their own food then and can?
From then on, they were to gather up, they were responsible for their own food. But, it's like here was this support, and then suddenly it's gone. Another thing that I thought was interesting is in Joshua chapter 3, it describes the crossing of the Jordan River. And as you can see on this map, the Jordan is quite a long river. And in verse 15 it says that the Jordan overflows its banks all the days of the harvest. And yet it goes on to tell of the crossing of the people, some 2 million on dry land. Something that only God could have done. Now, I know all of you have been watching the news and have seen what the Souris River is doing through Minot, what the Missouri River is doing coming down through Iowa and into Missouri. I just have this image in my mind of these rivers. Can you imagine now what would happen if God would stop the flow of that and suddenly there would be dry land for the people to cross over?
Be shocking, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it though? It's no wonder the people of Jericho were so terrified, because the God of this approaching people was obviously very powerful. At first, I can't imagine how 2 million people could cross this river anyway. That just is a mind-boggling thing. But, you know, think of what a miraculous thing that would be.
And they said the miraculous part of it was, when they parted the Red Sea, was the timing of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everybody says, oh, well, you know, that would be... But it was the timing. It was the timing of it. It was so miraculous. Part of it.
And now that they are across the river, and now the river goes back to overflowing, they're there. They can't go back. And so there's another part of, and Joshua he's preparing, and he receives this final reminder of his role in this remarkable encounter near the city of Jericho. And Israel was poised to go into that. In verse 13 in chapter 5, Joshua was probably doing what military commanders do on an eve of the military campaign. He's scouting out the lay of the land. And yet he suddenly finds himself in the presence of a man. And the man is in quotations. This figure accosted Joshua with a drawn sword. The unidentified man obviously perplexed Joshua, who asked, "Are you one of us or one of our adversaries?" And verse 14 announces to Joshua and the reader that this was no mere man. It was the angel of the Lord through whom Joshua was physically confronted by the presence of God. So Joshua asked the man whose side he was on. The answer was remarkable. Whose side was he on? Neither. That was the wrong question. Joshua's success was not dependent on whether God was on his side. Rather, Joshua needed to make sure that he, Joshua, was aligned with God. This was the proper stance for the leader of God's people. Joshua immediately recognized his error and assumed a position of humility by bowing down in worship of God. And Joshua asked, "What do you command your servant, my Lord?" And verse 15 records the answer of the man. Joshua was to remove his sandals in recognition of the sacredness of the moment and of the place. God's people must acknowledge and respect God's holiness as the first order of business. And this lesson is vital for Christian leadership. God emphasized to Joshua through this encounter that the key to success for him was maintaining the proper allegiance to God and recognizing the importance of God's holiness. Now, if you look in your student book, I'd like somebody to read that first paragraph of the scripture, Joshua 6, verses 2 to 3 and 4b.
The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have handed Jericho over to you, along with its king and soldiers. You shall march around the city, all the warriors circling the city once. Thus you shall do for 6 days. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing the trumpets."
Okay, and it says that in my interpreter's Bible that the city was relatively small, and so it was fairly easy for the people to march around it.